welcome back for another weekly segment of Ask Father Silva. This week, our question is brought to you by many people, believe it or not, who watched my video on genuflection and kneeling, either at Mass or just before the Lord and the Blessed Sacrament, and they came to me asking, Father, but what do you do if you can't kneel? Father, I have terrible knees. Father, I broke both of my legs. How am I supposed to kneel? Does that mean that God is not going to love me, or I can't love God the best I can? And the answer is obviously not, right? So there's some clarification that obviously needs to happen. Namely, the reason why rules exist is not for exceptions, right? And this is true in our own civil law, right? Back in 2018, there was a big flood that went through Trumbull, Connecticut, and my parents' house got 4 feet of water in it. And I got a call from my sister-in-law who was working at Sacred Heart University, not knowing the back roads because she's not from this area. I picked her up and I found myself many times driving on the wrong side of the road. Without care, obviously with great caution for sure, but thinking and knowing full well that if I happened to have been seen by a police officer because we had to get back to her infant child, and because there was no other way to get home, I knew for sure that I wasn't going to be fined or certainly not arrested for reckless driving, right? That was an exception to the rule. If you find yourself with bad knees, if you find yourself with arthritis, if you find yourself in a wheelchair or having some sort of injury, the answer is, of course you shouldn't genuflect. Of course you shouldn't kneel. God doesn't want you to do things that you can't do, for sure. Right? And so understanding that there are many times in which we find ourselves looking at these rules, looking at these great traditions of our church, and having to have an honest conversation with the Lord, an honest reflection of self, and saying, right, why am I not doing them? Is it for good reason? Right? Is it for just reason? Or do I just not want to do those things? So I'm glad you're asking these questions or raising these objections. Our Lord's not going to ask us to do things that we cannot do. Right? That's an unjust and unfair and an unloving, unreasonable God, right? And that's not our God. And so, if you can't genuflect, if you can't kneel, then guess what? You probably shouldn't do it, right? But if you can, right? And if you're just saying, I don't want to do it, that's a different story for sure. Have a good week.